What is a ticking time bomb that people should be worried about but aren't aware of? Story 1. Overfishing and bycatch has caused a huge loss of species and populations of fish. There are species that have been so overfished that there are not enough reproducing adults left. Young fish not at reproductive age are what's being caught, and in the next few years, we will see well-known fish species go extinct. Thousands of sharks are killed as bycatch daily, and larger species take so long to reproduce, they can't keep up either. Our oceans are about to look very different. Story 2, the Kessler effect. We have been putting all sorts of satellites and other space junk into low Earth orbit, LEO, for decades, without much of a coherent plan for how we were going to get that stuff down, or generally manage how much stuff was up there. At some point, scientists believe the density of space junk in the LEO will reach a critical mass and start a cascading chain reaction known as Kessler syndrome, or the Kessler effect. Under the right circumstances, two pieces of space debris, like old satellites, could crash into each other and explode into space debris, which crashes into other nearby space debris, which breaks apart and crashes into more nearby space debris, and so on, until there's a whole bunch of high-energy space garbage whizzing all over the low Earth atmosphere and destroying the satellites we depend on for a lot of our technology. Yes, a dramatized version of this is the plot of the movie Gravity, but it's also a very real thing that scientists have been worried about since the 70s. If the Kessler effect is bad enough, the LEO could become so dangerous that we're just functionally unable to use satellite technology or launch spacecraft for generations. Or at the very least, satellite technologies will be much more expensive and much shittier for a very long time. No one is sure exactly where critical density lies or how bad things might realistically get. But Kessler, the NASA scientist who first recognized this problem in the 1970s, concluded that the debris field was already becoming unstable in 2009. The demand for satellite tech is only growing, so we just sort of have to hope that growth in collision avoidance technology outstrips the increase in satellite density. Story 3. The erosion of education, at least in the US. Without substantial fact-checking from viable sources, misinformation is spreading at an ever-increasing rate on social media. People are taking it as gospel because our education systems in the US are so focused on metrics and teaching to standardized tests. Critical thinking and problem-solving is being boiled out of the curriculum. Funding is held hostage by those who test well. Tests are being created by the highest bidder. Students aren't taught to challenge their own thinking nor the works of others, and are instead seeing a societal norm where anyone can spout anything and find puppets who will agree. Story 4, societal collapse, specifically the lack of social security. I'm writing from the UK. Not sure how much of this applies to the US or elsewhere. Your mileage may vary. Back in the 1970s, the UK was one of the most equal societies in the West. Many people lived in social or council housing. In the 1980s, much of the social housing stock was sold off through right to buy. This, for many people, ended security of housing. Then, around the end of the century, there were short-term or zero-hours contracts getting rid of security of employment. Then you have the introduction of tuition fees in higher education, which broke the relationship between higher education and employment. What I'm writing about here is the long-term, premeditated breakdown of the social contract and the stripping away and removal of social security in the West. Young people today, in their 20s, are not stupid. They are starting to figure out that they're getting fuck all out of the system, which they're not even close, and they're being set up to fail. The current social-political model in places such as the UK and I guess in the US is not sustainable. You got a straightforward choice between A, social breakdown and civil unrest, B, totalitarianism, and C, complete socioeconomic collapse. Simple question. The year is 2030. How are you going to live? What are you going to be living on? What about your kids, if you have them? Story 5. The Cascadia Subduction Zone. Historically, there have been regular strong earthquakes every few hundred years. The Pacific Northwest is not built for earthquakes, and even a 7 would be a disaster. Never mind an 8 or even 9. One of these could wipe out large sections of the Pacific Northwest and cause massive casualties. Story 6. The convergence of human body temperature and the preferred temperature of fungi. Basically, the central premise of The Last of Us is based on an actual concern, but in reality, instead of zombies, it will just be deadly, incurable pandemics. There have already been some concerning clusters of opportunistic infections in ICUs across the world. It's only a matter of time. Story 7. I'm not sure how much of a time bomb it is, but there are a lot of people expecting inheritances that will never materialize. With people living a really long time, entire middle-class estates are going to be wiped out by long-term care. If your parents can't afford to live in a nursing home, Medicaid will pay for it in exchange for every asset they have, leaving you with nothing. If you are young, don't count on inheriting their house because your parents will be living to 100. Story 8. Collapsing demographics. Our economic system is built around growing populations. As demographics roll over, our entire modern system of exchange comes under stress and will need serious overhauls, which will only happen after the consequences are dire enough to necessitate it. Demographic collapse and deglobalization, the collapse of global trade, are going to be the root causes of a myriad of horrors, yet most people will never know and will only be aware of the symptoms, not the cause. People will say inflation, shortages in food, water, and other goods, rising wars, etc. But ultimately, it all comes back to demographics, economics, geography, and trade. Every great empire in history thought they alone were different. They never are, and either are we. We've lived through the rise, and now we will witness the other side of that slope. Story 9. The U.S. Social Security System. People are living longer than when the plan was first introduced, and the money paid annually in FICA taxes is insufficient to cover all the payouts. Couple this with the fact that the government doesn't even save your contributions and spends it immediately on other stuff, and it's clear this system is due to collapse. Either they end the program, which would suck for everyone who has paid into it their whole lives, or they increase the deficit to fund it, which will just make inflation worse. Story 10. Histoplasmosis. I believe many of you have compared this to The Last of Us. It is a fungal infection that causes growths that resemble tumors, usually in the lungs, but in some cases it is found in the sinuses. It is caused by a fungal spore found in poultry feed that the bird ingests. Then it is activated in the bird droppings. When the droppings get into the air through cleaning and transportation, the spores make it into the air supply and get breathed in by humans. Many people need partial lobes and even entire lungs removed as a result of this disease. For people with it in the sinuses, it can begin pressing on the brain when it runs out of room in the sinuses. The illness is very hard to diagnose and often looks like repeat infections, like a sinus infection or bronchitis. Usually it requires an MRI and trying different medications to make an official diagnosis. Most cases, people don't get diagnosed until the growths are pretty big and usually already caused permanent damage. The infection can cause flu-like symptoms, memory loss, and brain fog, expelling growths in blood when you cough or blow your nose, fatigue, weakness, and in cases where the growth presses on the brain, loss of feeling and use of the limbs. The brain fog and memory loss can also be permanent. I live in Arkansas, where there are 2 major chicken companies and about a half dozen other poultry plants, and I used to live 2 blocks from one of the most busy kill plants in the U.S. It used to be that only people with problems with their immune system or other serious illnesses were getting it. Now perfectly healthy people are dying from it in our area. It used to be that we were breathing in 1,000 spores a day, but they don't even report the air quality anymore. To make things worse, they keep opening more plants in more areas to make up for our massive chicken consumption. These companies have done an aggressive job making sure that the air quality regulations are not safe, and that they don't get in trouble for making everyone sick. There's all these people walking around here with missing lungs or missing lobes, and everyone just acts like it's normal. So many people are sick and don't even know it. Some even die never knowing what made them sick. Oh, and it can be easily prevented by simply buying quality feed for the birds. Yep, that's simple. I almost died so they could save a few bucks on feed. Story 11. When all the hedge funds and whatnot who bought into real estate as an investment decide, whether by choice or legal mandate, to divest themselves from that market, there will be a real estate market glut followed almost immediately by another foreclosure crisis. We fixed nothing after 2008, and the banks went straight to work building a new economic doomsday device. Story 12. The Gulf Stream, which is responsible for the relatively warm climate of Western Europe, could collapse in the next century. This would cause temperatures to drop 10, 15 degrees year-round, making the region's climate more similar to Canada. Anyone who's been through a Canadian winter can tell you that Europe is not prepared for that. Aside from that, it would disrupt rain patterns vital to food production and cause massive flooding in the eastern United States. Story 13. Plastic. Plastic is literally the worst thing ever invented. It's everywhere. In the oceans, on top of Mount Everest, in all the foods we eat, water we drink, and is accumulating in our bodies at rapid scales. Everyone wonders why cancer rates are through the roof and fertility rates are down and life expectancy is down. It's a hormone disruptor, and our bodies were not designed to accumulate it at all. We're literally poisoning ourselves. DNA will mutate to adapt over thousands of years, but who knows the short-term impact over the next few hundred years. Story 14. The impact of the pandemic on a generation of young kids. The younger they are, the worse it is. And now that the kids are back, they're part feral, and the parents have given up. Having the fuckers at home during COVID broken most of them, and many weren't great parents to begin with. There's another bubble, and that's a behavioral one. No one wants to work sped anymore because it used to be one. 2 behavioral kids and the rest were developmental. Now it's inverse. They're IEPing kids who are just shits because their parents can't or won't discipline them just to get them out of the classroom and into some extra resources so that the kids that aren't fucked don't get dragged down with them. We need to prepare. We need to change how we do special ed, and we need to figure out how to fix a generation of kids and how to get their parents to let us fix them. We need to create behavioral programs that will turn them back into human beings instead of the feral things that they are. Because feral things don't do well out in the world. Even the good kids are rough compared to older generations. They have so few life skills, and the system tries to placate them enough to scoot them through the system. I suppose it doesn't matter, there won't be many jobs in a generation at any rate. Source. My wife heads the SPED department at a local school. Story 15. ISIS prison camps in North Syria, Kurdish-controlled. When ISIS got PW'd by Kurds, USA, Iran, Russia, the Kurds made their own gov in North Syria and acts outside the Syrian governor, the ISIS fighters, who many were international citizens, Germany, USA, UK, etc., are now in prison camps in this region. Problem is, they had kids who were radicalized, and many are still radicalizing via the prison system there. No gov wants them back in their home countries, and the Kurdish gov is pretty poor to house, keep them indefinitely. We may see the Islamic State come back if the prison camps fail. Story 16. If you get dementia and need to live in a nursing home, get ready to pay $15K a month out of pocket. If you don't have that, you'll have to go on Medicaid. Medicaid will want you to have spent every penny you have on your own care. Any gifts given by you 5 years prior will get you a penalty, even if you and your family had no idea what was in store. The 5-year look back didn't exist until 2006. After you die, they will take your house too if you had one. Most people can't just drop everything to provide 24/7 care for someone with dementia, especially considering people with dementia can become aggressive and violent. There will be no more inheritances for many families who had been passing down money and homes for generations. Story 17. The $1.5 student loan bubble. I think a lot of us tend to conflate really big numbers. Like 1M and 1T all sounds the same to us. More money than we'll ever make. Millennials and Gens don't really plan to pay them. Whether you agree with them or not, it still means there's a giant debt that's never going to be paid. I'm no economist, but I would think that something like that can have pretty serious ramifications nationally, and potentially even globally. Someone should probably pay, whether it's individuals or the government. However, capitalism dictates that we create broken system where people are just permanently indebted instead. More profitable in the long run. Story 18. The first worldwide crop failure. Sure, it won't be entirely global, but there will be a massive worldwide famine sometime in the next 10, 20 years, unless the entire planet gets its collective shit together and starts seriously working some massive geoengineering solutions to combat climate change. Developed places will have it easier as they have more wealth and infrastructure in place, but less developed countries like India with massive populations and an already dangerously hot climate are not prepared and will be hit hard. One of the major causes of the Arab Spring in 2011 was a food shortage. Imagine that on a global scale. Modern crops are pretty tough, but all it takes is one massive weather event like a severe heat dome coupled with a drought, and you can wipe out a massive amount of food for millions of people. Learn how to grow potatoes. Story 19. The cost of housing, at least in the US. It's affecting middle-class people as well as poor people. It's becoming unsustainable in my area, and probably many other areas of the country as well. Towns that used to be known as blue-collar towns are charging rents that they used to only see in the wealthier towns. I don't know how they expect people to pay these rents/mortgages. We're going to get to the point where we need 8 people in a one-bedroom apartment to afford it. At a certain point, it's unsustainable. Story 20. The ever-encroaching gray ceiling in most jobs' careers throughout the world. There's an entire generation set to start dropping like flies within the next 5, 10 years, but continue to hold skilled jobs either due to being unwilling or unable to retire. With the millennial generation being locked out, Gen Z is largely unwilling to take the same college is the only real career choice. We were fed, and thus there will be a massive gap in suitable replacements once these positions start to open. So many industries will be crippled by the lack of a suitable replacement workforce. This will hit all industries, manufacturers, raw materials. Should be an interesting decade. Story 21. Short-term consumer debt, especially automotive debt. The only reason repossessions are not higher is because there are not enough repo men. Auto wholesale auctions are having record no sales. Banks are rapidly dumping auto loans. Because of dealer markups, people are carrying record levels of negative equity. Dealerships are defaulting on their floor plan financing. I predict a major bloodbath in the automotive sector. Story 22. Man, you all would have been real useful when I was getting tricked out. The stalking didn't help much either. Yeah, but at least there's an online community of, I think they are called distractions that get foisted onto me should I care to. It's weird how everyone forgets the year prior to me being let in on the Squirt, Meister, Grinder, Sniffies, a 4A, Clubberg, Man in all black fun. You have any specific places you would like me to donate blood? Somebody could have their life changed in financially, socially, spiritually, and physically great ways. Or at least get a Ford, F-150. Not me, though. I get pissed off looks because of things that never happened. Asterisk wink asterisk smooth.